Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Between Sundays. We're thankful that you're here joining us. My name is Jeff Kammerer, and I'm here with Jim Kistner, and we're going to be talking a little bit about small groups in today's episode. But before we do that, I think we can bypass maybe some of the introductions. I think Jim and I have both had a chance to get on a podcast or two here or there, and so we'll bypass some of the introductions that we normally have and jump right into a recap or a rehash or just talking through some key points of yesterday's sermon. And so I'll throw it over to Jim. John went through Revelation 2, verses 8 through 11. So real short section to the church of Smyrna. So what are some of the key takeaways that you had?
I think that talked about the church at Smyrna being rich yet poor. So we saw that they had persecution. He talks about a man named Polycarp, which is a great thing to look up if you don't know that story of his. But, excuse me. But I think today we have to be careful about defining the terms rich and poor. And rich, if you define it in money, is not the way you would define it there. They were rich in faith. They were rich in their commitment to be faithful. But they were not a rich church. They were a suffering church.
Yeah, and that was kind of like the key component, almost like a really difficult sermon, I think, just in general, both to hear and to have to preach because of the just the reality that was going to exist in this church of like what they were going to experience and the persecution that was going to take place in their life. And so I think being faithful was kind of a key component in the sermon yesterday.
Absolutely. And I think as we talk about faith and faithfulness, the important thing isn't, I could have faith that I can fly, and that doesn't go very far.
Yeah.
Jump off the Empire State Building, I'm going to die. So it's really the object of your faith, which is, so it always points to Christ in that. And truly, I'm not a Greek scholar, but I think faith and faithfulness are very similar, if not identical. And sometimes the word is picked by the translators based on context. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, our faithfulness doesn't reside in, I'm such a solid individual, I never change. It always resides in the faithfulness of God and of Christ.
Speaking of like the Greek context of writing, I think I appreciated that John mentioned that there was the command, the imperative command, the only time that in the Bible that we see an imperative to faithfulness, to being faithful. And I think that's a really interesting and I think appropriate way for us to think about just our life in general, but then how that intersects with moments in our life when we're going to experience suffering or pain or difficulty, and how that faithfulness that's been built up over the years actually is then on full display in those moments of faithfulness, and then they were promised the crown of life.
And I think that is so. That whole theme of suffering is so important, and big picture. I think suffering comes from, it rains on the just and the unjust. We all suffer something, in life. Yeah. It's just never the way we would like to paint it. But I think that was a particular kind in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5. Jesus kind of talks about the suffering from being faithful to him. And that's certainly what Polycarp, as he was executed, experienced. But in all suffering, I think John mentioned that the key component is Jesus suffers himself, so he knows what suffering is, and he suffers along with us as we suffer. And ultimately, we know the end. Yeah. And the end is what makes all of our suffering something that we accept, knowing that one day all that suffering will be gone.
Yeah. I think I did appreciate how the end was just kind of focused on Polycarp and focused
Yeah.
on his it might have been the first sermon he's ever preached here where he hasn't used walking points. Can you remember a sermon where he hasn't had walking points?
No,
If you didn't get-
we get into that habit, don't
Yeah,
we?
if you didn't get a chance to listen to the sermon this week, I think it's one of the few, if not the only one, where he doesn't issue any walking points, and the reason why is because suffering takes various forms, and
It does, and-
there's not really a way to know how you're going to be able to respond.
And Polycarp was kind of the walking point.
Yeah.
You know, God's been faithful to us. How can we not be faithful to Him?
Yep, and so it was a good reminder, I think, of
Yes.
of this church and how they're rich in their faith, even though they don't have as much resources, and so it was a really good reminder for
Good
us
summary.
to be faithful
Yep.
as believers. And so, all right, well, let's switch gears here a little bit and start focusing on small groups or Bible studies or Sunday school. You may have heard them coined a lot of different phrases. I think our website has a whole category of life groups even, and so we have a lot of different categories. And I thought that maybe we could start talking through maybe some of those definitions and try and look through what is the difference between a small group and a Sunday school and a life group. Is there a difference? So let's kick it off with that.
That's a great question. In my brain, and before we hit that, I wondered, why even talk about groups? And I think that you're right. That's the next question of what types of groups. But I think the why struck me this morning, that God was before creation in group, meaning God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. And I think if we're made in His image, we're kind of foolish not to accept the fact that we need each other.
Yeah.
Maybe the best explanation of that might come from, I think 1 Peter 2 talks about Jesus being the cornerstone, but we're like little pebbles, and we're built together into a house. And you can't have a house with one pebble. I
Yeah.
mean, by definition, we need each other. And that whole idea, certainly Pastor John is really strong on that whole idea of corporateness. And so that gets right back to your question of
Yeah.
what kind of groups are there?
Well, and to build on that a little bit further, though, even Jesus, it's contained in His nature as God, like you said, but it's also something that He demonstrated. I mean, Jesus had a lot of followers, but we have 12 that He specifically chose to minister, and so it's almost like Jesus interacting with His 12 disciples. That was sort of like His small group.
It was. And then his D group was,
Yep.
Peter, James, and John.
Yep, and I think it's not a. There's a reason why churches do this pattern particularly, and it's because it's what Jesus set up and established, and that's kind of what He intended for us to replicate is the idea of you need to meet in smaller groups. I mean, Jesus had the Sermon on the Mount. There's lots of times when Jesus was teaching large groups of
Yep.
people, but His life was invested in these 12 guys who then invested their life into others.
Exactly. So you might want to talk about what types of groups you've been involved in. I know we've been in several different ones.
Yeah, I think so. I guess growing up in church, I've always been part of Sunday school until I joined pastoral staff about 20 years ago, and that put an end to my Sunday school career because I had ministry responsibilities on Sunday, and
Yeah.
so it really it kind of took me into, okay, well, I need to shift my focus, and we have lots of folks that are tied up on Sunday morning with other things,
Sure.
and they're not able to participate in a I guess a typical normal Sunday school type of setting. And so my main experience in groups has been a small group, or I think our church defines and classifies them as life groups. In other words, they are groups of people that meet at home, or sometimes they meet here on campus, but generally it's a home setting, and you meet together for the purpose of studying the Word. That's central, but also there's a lot of just doing life with one another. When you go into someone's home, you have a different relationship with that person than you would if you're just in a classroom at church. And so there's just a uniqueness of that. And I remember when we first started our life group here at Rainbow Forest, we had a desire to kind of collect people who were all tied up. Well, you're teaching in kids ministry on Sunday. You're serving in the worship ministry on Sunday, and so we had all these groups of people that, well, you can't meet on Sunday either, and you can't meet on Sunday, and so let's gather all these people together, and so that became the genesis of our life group that started about 5 years ago, and has since transformed, included different people, and has multiplied a couple times. And but that was the genesis of it. We had people that couldn't be part of our normal Sunday morning groups ministry, and so we kind of birthed it off of that, which I know is a little bit different than your experience over the years. So
Actually, more similar than perhaps when I was first saved. We were involved in a church that emphasized kind of life groups. We were in they call them covenant groups. They go by all kinds of names. And there were about 6 couples. So it was the first couples group. And it was remarkable in changing my life because it experienced a level of life together and fellowship that we'd never experienced as couples before. We certainly had friends that we would eat with and, go over to their house, but this was different. We met weekly, and so it was a fairly intense thing, and probably lasted 2.5 years, which may not be the model for all groups, but it was probably the first time that I think culture was a little different then, and guys in high school, college, after college didn't generally hang out with girls just as friends as much as they do now. So it was more of a dating thing if you're going to hang out. But this was just great fellowship of couples together, and we grew remarkably in our marriage, and just we had young kids at that stage, and so that was a very important group.
I like the idea, and I think and maybe we'll get into this a little bit, because I think that a lot of groups have this structure of like you want to do a few things. You want to study the Bible together. You want to be lifting one another up in prayer, and you want to have some life on life connection. Like you want to be connected to them so that hey, I have something going on in my job, or I got there's something happening with my kid that's really been a struggle that you kind of lose sight of on Sunday. And so I think that maybe it would be helpful to start and shift the focus of the discussion on what difference is there in being in a small group versus the corporate setting. So in main worship, like why is it important that we have people in small groups?
For sure. I think as you're doing life, you have to limit the number of people that really can know you, because you just don't have enough time. And you can't wear everything on your sleeve as you go out. And now that is, I think, one of the core importance of that type of a group, where they pray for you, they know what's going on in your life, they encourage you, there's an accountability aspect, and it, of course, should have a foundation of being based on the Word. I don't think that's the only kind of a group that's important. We've since been involved in single gender groups, my wife with women, me with leading some men groups, and they certainly have a place. The Promise Keepers groups, historically, after the big gatherings that Promise Keepers would have spun off men's groups. And I think several on our staff, Pastor Lane among them, would say that those were life transforming, different than the couples groups, but nonetheless really important.
So if someone was saying like I'm not in a group at all, like, and I want to get plugged into a group because we have different groups that have different focuses. I think that we have some Bible study groups that they're diving into the Word together. We've had some small groups, life groups that kind of do life with one another. What do you think would be your advice to someone who's saying like, hey, I'm not really a part of any group. Like, where should I start? Like, who should I contact? What type of group should I jump into first?
Probably a good way to meet people, Sunday morning groups, Wednesday night open groups, I think would be a great place to start because you'll meet some people, and then as God leads, you may decide to be in a smaller, more intimate setting. I think any group that's healthy should focus more on transformation than information. My Sunday morning Bible study, small group, Sunday school, however it's labeled, probably is so tired of hearing that. But God doesn't give us information to make us the smartest people in the world as much as he desires life transformation. And I think that whatever type group, that ought to be the focus of how do I better model who Jesus is and grow more like him. But it would be a great place to start in one of the groups that's already here. They're open, you're welcome, they will make you feel welcome.
Yeah, and it there's kind of an elimination of some of the barriers that exist with groups in that we have programming for kids during that time, and so it's kind of not something that you have to think about. You can kind of, no matter if it's Wednesday or Sunday, you can jump into a group and start learning. But you're right. I think there's a tendency for people just to continue to jump into group after group after group, and like you're part of 3 or 4 different groups in the course of a week, and I think that there's some real positives if you can fit that into your schedule, but there are also some difficulties and challenges in that as well. And I think that if I were answering that question to someone, I would simply ask them what do they think they need from a group. What is your greatest challenge at the moment? Are you struggling in your marriage? Are you just a new believer? You just don't know a lot of the Bible. You just need someone that's going to teach you well. Are you looking to build relationships with people in your same life stage? Or, I think so. We have groups that can really satisfy all of those different areas. I think it's just a matter of each individual person and how they're going to respond to that. I think the bottom line is, well, like we've hit at the very, very beginning, groups ministry in general is very biblically based, in that it's really how God set us up to function.
And I think being part of what we'd call a D group, a small group, emphasizing Bible study, accountability, showing up, praying for each other, is a great place to start, because if you start with that, you may be led into by your needs into other types of groups, but that is kind of core with becoming a disciple of Jesus Christ. And I think that is an excellent place to begin, because to be honest, our felt needs sometimes aren't what our real need is. We may think we have this problem with our marriage, but it's really based upon maybe pride, things that could be ferreted out in other contexts.
Yeah, you bring up something that kind of it drew my mind to, like, you hear this concept a lot. I think it maybe even be on one of the promo videos that we have before service, like the concept of doing the one another's for people. One of our core beliefs is that we have devotional love to God and to others. And I think that it's really difficult to love other people well if you don't really know what's going on in their life. Like you need to have some type of just idea of what they are experiencing to be able to actually come alongside of them and offer them the support. And that's what's happened for me. That's been my experience, is that I know the people in our group better than everyone else that attends on Sunday morning, because we're actually doing life together. We're texting one another. We're meeting together at group, and we're meeting together outside of group time. And, all of those components kind of come together to really complete this process of discipleship. Like, I just don't know if you can do that well if you are not part of a group.
Yeah. And that kind of brings it all back to why we need a group. And just quick comment is we can get together and have occasionally with people that we were in a group with 40 years ago in a wholly different place in the country, get together with them now and have a common bond after even 40 years, keeping up at Christmas and other times. They are lifelong friends.
Yeah, we have we're at the point right now. Actually, Ashton and I just did a podcast recently about multiplying groups, because they were part of our group and multiplied out, and kind of had this like tension of like, hey, we have a portion of our friends now who kind of like, we became friends with them as a result of being together in this group, and now kind of they're doing separate things, and yet we're still functioning in that same way of the friendship is still present and existing, and because there's this desire to bring more people into groups. Exactly. And when you want to bring more people into a group, then you have to multiply, or else you have now all of a sudden you can move from one congregation large group to maybe another large group, because you have people that just kind of get lost in the background. And so for us, it was more a logistical thing. We just couldn't fit that many more people in our house. Sure. So we naturally had to multiply, and so we're at the point now where we kind of have that hope for just a lot of our groups, that they're growing to a point where they're needing someone else. Hey, we need more people to lead, because we have people that aren't in groups that we need to get into groups, and it's for all the purposes that we've kind of outlined here.
Exactly.
So anything else? Any other thoughts? Or
no, I think we could talk about that all day, but probably at that point nobody would listen to it.
Perfect. Bottom line, we want you in a group. You can go to rainbowforest.com/groups. I'm assuming that's the URL. I have really no idea, but you can find it online. You can find it on Church Center. We have a list of all of them: Wednesday night, Sunday morning. We have groups that meet off campus at different times. We have men's groups and women's groups. And so we would love for you to get plugged in somewhere to help dive into discipleship even more, to love one another well, and really to grow in your relationship with Christ. And so that's the goal, that's the hope, and so we would love for you to get plugged in. If you have any questions about groups, Jim or I would be happy to assist you and answer those questions and help you to get plugged in. But for now, I think we'll sign off until next time. Thank you.